So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the lab and the research that we're doing. And I'm gonna share my screen to show you some slides and some videos. And I'm gonna share the sound as well. And now you should be able to see the slides, I think. Is it big screen now? The slides are filling up the screen? Yes, brilliant. Yeah, the title of the talk is Creative AI in Our Hands, Playing with Intelligent Instruments. And this is a project that we're running where we're focusing on creative AI, which of course is a field that is booming at the moment. It's been very active for some decades, of course, but as you all know, in the past year or two, with the advent of generative AI, particularly in the hands of users as consumer services, we are all playing with creative AI, whether it's ChatGPT and with text, or all these image and video and sound generating services, which are actually becoming quite impressive at the moment. They're not excellent, but I would say they are an engineering victory, a feat. You know, it's pretty impressive how far we've come in the past years there. But our project is slightly different. A lot of those services are on textual prompting. You talk, you put in a command, and you get a response in the form of an image or a sound or text. But in this project, we're kind of interested in the phenomenology of working with musical instruments, where the AI becomes a co-player or an agent or something that is part of our real-time, embodied, situated context. So it becomes part of our body. It becomes part of the physical instrument, not this call and response, talking with the system, but more kind of an extension of our body and mind. So it's a project that is funded by the ERC, European Research Council. So that makes it possible for us to focus on this for a 5-year period. And it's hosted at the University of Iceland. And what I want to talk about today is a little bit how we operate in terms of social engagement and citizen science. The way that obviously it doesn't make sense for us to sit 5 or 6 or 7 people in the ivory tower of a university research lab and speculate about how great AI instruments are for music making. We have to work with people. We have to talk with composers and performers. We develop instruments and we put them out into the field and collaborate with people. So this is, of course, great for public engagement and citizen science and all those things that are quite important in contemporary academic context. But we also think it is a very important research methodology for ourselves. It is through collaborating with people that we really understand our questions and our what we're doing. It's the feedback from people and experiences they have with these instruments that we are interested in. So I can show you just 2 very recent videos. We did a workshop on overtone flutes 2 weeks ago. And following that, we had a concert in Reykjavik where people who made these flutes, they performed with their instruments. And the instruments were typically augmented with digital technologies and some kind of systems that made the flute more than just a physical object, but systems that exhibited some kind of agency, conversation, or dialogue. And the first video is from that concert. And here we have a performer who designed this flute and the electronics for it. I'm gonna play it now. Okay, that's enough of this one. I want to also show you just a video from yesterday's Open Lab. Every Friday we open up our lab to people to explore some new work, and we are lucky to have a visiting researcher with us these days who's called Zeno van der Broek from Holland, and he's working with mechanical instruments and installations. And in this video, you can see how two percussionists, or in this case, people who were in the audience who came to the Open Lab, they were exploring the interaction between them playing and the machinic response. I think the video will explain. And in this case, we were exploring all kinds of interesting algorithms that represented the mapping between the human input and the way that the machine responded. A lot of the discussion was also about whether this was an instrument or whether it was a co-player, like someone external to the performance. And it was quite interesting that, you know, different algorithms, different mappings, different AI algorithms really changed the way that we perceived the solenoids hitting the wooden block. Whether it's in some cases it felt like an instrument, it felt like an extension of what you were doing, but then applying other algorithms, it became more of a distant co-player or an agency that was outside of yourself, something that kind of became an external thing that you had to respond to and play with in a way more similar to how you play with a human. So this is not a binary, you know, an instrument or an external agent. It's almost like it exists on a continuum, how the instrument at some point it's very close to you, it's very much part of your body, it's part of your mind, and it kind of follows what you're thinking. But in other cases, it moves away from you and it becomes something that is external and you have to respond to in a different way. And it's so interesting to set these experiments up with people and have these conversations in an ad hoc kind of open way, because through these conversations we realize so many things. It's so interesting just to have people playing with these instruments and these systems, because the more viewpoints you have, the more kind of comments from people with different backgrounds and different experiences, the better you see the object. So I really recommend kind of opening up your labs and when you're developing things to work with people and work with as many performers as you can. So I want to talk a little bit about the background of the project and also what we're thinking of in this work. So I've been very interested in musical instruments as tools for thinking, and how musical instruments kind of define the music that we make. And this is, of course, something that has been the fact for all music at all times. And in a book that I will introduce in a moment, I explored kind of how three different types of instruments, acoustic instruments, electric instruments, and digital instruments, how they affect our thinking and embodied performance in very different ways. For example, in the acoustic instruments with violins or guitars or percussion, the instrument itself, the interface, is at the same time the sound production tool. So the vibration is coming from underneath your fingers often, and the energy that you put into the instrument is the energy that comes out of it. There's a very close mapping between gesture and sound, and you have an intimate relationship with the instrument. And fine control. It's mostly in these instruments you have a direct mapping, except maybe for harpsichord or pianos or organs, where there is a mechanism. That's a mapping. The hammer of the piano is a mechanism between you and the string. But mostly in these acoustic instruments, you are kind of interacting with the sound generator directly. It's under your finger, so to say. With electric instruments, you start to move away from this, and there's another energy source that comes into the picture, which is electricity and amplification and all kinds of electronics that can change the sound. But at the same time, it's still a direct kind of mapping from input to output. You have the electronics, you can do all kinds of things like filtering and so on, but there is a certain logic that is from the input to the output. But with digital instruments, all these mappings become very arbitrary, and you can basically design anything. You can map your instrument in any way and use algorithms to define the instrument. You can introduce scales or patterns of pitches or rhythms and so on in ways that you can't do with the other instruments. So digital instruments open up and offer an easier access. For example, we can make instruments for children or kind of amateur musicians, or people who want to learn music, or disabled people, and so on. We can kind of design instruments for more focused applications and uses. And this opens up a lot of interesting areas, I think. But I've been thinking about this for a long time, and a few years ago, a book that I wrote came out called Sonic Writing. And this is where I look into the technologies of material, symbolic, and signal inscriptions. I think musical instruments are inscriptions of musical ideas into material objects. So music theory comes out of the objects, but we also impose music theory into the objects. So, for example, the idea of having 12 notes in an octave in the piano, for example, this is an imposed theory that kind of is inscribed into the musical object. Symbolic inscriptions is much kind of younger practice where we, with the advent of writing and printing and so on, we've had for maybe, 4,000 years, if we really want to stretch it to some Hittite tablets, but maybe with, music theory and writing systems and notation systems, we're really just talking about 2,500 years where we've been in the practice of inscribing music through symbolic systems. And of course, as you know, the advent of musical notation, even if it exists in the past, in ancient times, it's really in the 10th century, 11th and 12th, that this system develops. And with the Gutenberg press, you start to get music as a product, musical scores as a music product, as a file format, so to say, that could be commercialized and distributed. And with that, we also got the idea of the composer, the author, who started to attach their name to the compositions. In earlier times, it was mostly anonymous pieces of music. It was folk music, for example, and they didn't have authors. And you still have that in other musical cultures around the world. I mean, the Indian ragas don't have a composer that composed them. They just exist, and they've been in the tradition for centuries. And with signal inscriptions, we're talking about recording, phonography, to write the audio signal into some kind of material object. That's a wax cylinder or the wire or tape. But with the digital computer, we also get very sophisticated signal inscriptions where we can, of course, apply all kinds of analysis and music information retrieval techniques from machine listening and so on. So I think a lot of these technologies that we have in modern musical instruments, they exist in the past. We have had algorithmic music for millennia and for many centuries. There were, for example, Athanasius Kircher, the monk in the 17th century. He developed some musical robots and or musical machines, and also automated composition systems. And this is what we do in the computer today very easily. But a lot of that kind of maps to what we would call symbolic AI, where algorithms are defined and there is some kind of a machine that performs the algorithms. And of course, we don't need a machine to do that. We could do it by hand, but it just takes longer. But really, I mean, the last sentence of this slide is, and then the 21st century started. I think what I'm hinting at here is that in the past 10 years, and particularly in the past 2 years, we have the capability with great computer systems, server farms, and computer or programming architectures for machine learning, and also all the big data that exists all over the net. We're able to train neural networks on the data. So that is, like Rebecca said earlier, it represents a great shift. So you're not algorithmically defining what the computer can do or how it behaves, but you're rather teaching it how to respond to input. And this opens up for all kinds of possibilities. And in a way, it is a technology that you cannot find in the past, like a lot of the symbolic AI. It is a completely new paradigm shift in the way that we program computers through learning. You could maybe find that in gardening, the way people curate flowers, but also how they train animals and so on. I mean, there's a bit of teaching and, kind of giving awards and punishments and so on. And that is something we do in machine learning, of course. But it is really a new field that we're in. It's a completely new environment. And when you add this teaching into the musical instruments, if you have instruments that are adapting to you, performing with you, learning from you, and changing behavior, I think it's interesting to look at the dynamics between a performer and the instrument. And I call that in my book ergodynamics. It's the way that the functions of your body are translated into the functions of the instruments, but also what the instrument is in context, in time and space. What kind of aesthetics is there? What kind of history is there in the instrument? What kind of feeling do you get? And it's here that we find that phenomenology is very important. We need to study how we relate to the instrument, how we feel about them, and how we kind of engage with them, and what kind of musical ideas the instruments are imposing into for us. How does the instrument affect us? And we are finding that there is an interesting shift in music where people are becoming more, a lot of performers that we work with are becoming more interested in having the instrument speak or talk and offer up new dialogues. And many people have commented, for example, that the old idea of mastery of an instrument, of becoming a genius or some kind of virtuoso of your instrument, that people are becoming a bit tired of this, and they're wanting a bit more open dialogue with the instruments, a bit more exploration in the instruments, and to see the instrument as a system they can navigate rather than a dead object that they just perform on with their highly trained movements. Personally, I think this relates to how we, people who are younger than, I guess, 50 or something, grew up with computer games. We're used to interactive systems. We're used to navigating spaces, virtual spaces, and we're used to non-linear narratives and to use controllers to kind of explore. But it also relates to a certain philosophy that is happening quite strongly at the moment, where which could be called post-humanism, where we are starting to realize more, strongly, I guess, that the human species are not so unique, and that we are kind of messing around with the world and kind of posing a great danger to the earth itself, but also wanting to engage with nature and animals and artificial systems in a way where you're not focusing on the human ego, on the author, on the performer, but opening up for other influences. So it becomes more of a systematic or ecosystematic thinking, as opposed to one-directional interpretation of some kind of a score applied to a dead object, which is the musical instrument. This is a kind of a shift that is happening, and we are exploring that in 3 different research packages in our project, where we focus on the self. In the first work package, it's the phenomenology of musical instruments. In the second package, we focus on sociology, how it feels to work with non-human and human agents on the stage, in the musical performance. And in the third work package, we're looking at how this can be applied in epistemology, in knowledge, how knowledge changes with musical instruments. So how can we use instruments to study the world, to study musical scores, for example, or musical data, but also other kinds of data. And I like to kind of move back a little bit into history, to the 17th century, where we started to use instruments in science, so tools and instruments to understand the world and to explore the world through all kinds of devices. And I think what we're doing today is in many ways similar to that. We have created a lab that has a wall like this, and we design our instruments in a very ad hoc, quick prototyping methods, and we work with people to develop and change their instruments quickly in order to explore these ideas and answer the research questions we have. So lots of people come into our lab and work with us, play with us, and explore our ideas. The first instrument that we created was based on an Icelandic traditional instrument called the langspill, but we added agency to it through technology of feedback. So there's a resonator as part of this instrument, and the instrument behaves very unpredictably and interestingly, which gives the performer a bit of space to navigate and explore during a performance. It's difficult to play, for example, well, you can if you tune the instrument that way, but it's difficult to, when the instrument is in its essence, it's difficult to play with full control of the instrument. The idea of the instrument is to be a partner in the collaboration of musical playing, and we have found that people really love that. Yeah, so we have these open labs, and they are great. We get people to come, and they even take our instruments and develop their own instruments out of what we are making. So this instrument here on the right, we designed it as a Eurorack kind of module, so you can have the outputs of your synth modules feeding into the string instrument and resonating, so it becomes like a feedback physical resonator. And one of our collaborators really took that idea the full way and designed this kind of Eurorack module, where you can see that the instrument is really part of a Eurorack system. Yeah, we work with all kinds of materials, and this is seaweed, and we've been exploring seaweed in musical performance. We've also been exploring, like here on the right, e-textiles. We're interested in how the physics of the musical instrument changes and the perception of it as well when we use soft materials, kind of well-designed materials, beautiful materials, warm and flexible, as opposed to the typically hard materials of musical instruments. And in digital technologies, of course, as you know, we use plastic and rubber and glass screens and metal, which are, materials of precision. But with e-textiles, we get materials that are quite open for this kind of exploration that we're interested in. And I'm going to just play this video. It's Sophie Skach and Victor Shepardson. They have been performing on a no input mixer, but they use which is a feedback system, but they use the e-textiles as an interface for the system. Yeah, so I find it very interesting to put these systems out and have these open labs where people are collaborating like this, doing experiments, and then we talk a lot around these things. And by using e-textiles, for example, we opened up for a completely different type of research community, like people who work with textiles and are interested in textiles, and to have them collaborating with us was really inspiring. It opened up for so many interesting questions. So that's another way when we're doing music, there is no limit to music really. Music is everywhere and everyone is interested in it, and it's possible to kind of apply the research we do in music in all kinds of fields. But what I've been saying is the shift that we are talking about is really, for me, and I argue for this in the book, it's a shift from composing a work like we did in the classical times, the idea of the big work and the big composer inspired by the muses, writing it down onto a notational score. I find that in today's music, and where the cutting edge of new music is happening, people are moving into inventing a system rather. So the work is replaced by a system, and the system is something that is open for exploration in real time on the stage. You could also say composing a system, but invention is a classical term for composition. Bach created inventions, for example, and it's a term from rhetorics. But it just happens that it also means the way we invent things today, often with technology, and so the invention of a system becomes really what I think a lot of composers and performers are doing. People are inventing audiovisual systems, instruments, installations, sound art, and so on. And it's always kind of a particular take. It's an original take. It's an original and idiosyncratic way of playing with technology and exploring the expressive potential of technology. I think we're a little bit late, and I don't want to take up too much time, but maybe I'll show a few more videos. I wanted to show this Basque instrument where you have two players playing. And in this case, we removed one of the human players. We trained the neural network on the human players, and the neural network is responding. So you can hear that here. This is a traditional Basque instrument, and it has a lot of interesting history. But for us, what we liked about it is that you cannot play it solo. You have to play together, two people at least. And we explored then to remove one of the humans and create a machine agent that would respond. This created so many interesting thoughts and experiences. For example, that we trained it on a lot of data, but the last training sessions we did for the neural network was with these two performers. And it was interesting how the system picked up the style of those performers and how they engage. So other Chalaparta players who tried the system, they really felt that they were playing with them. It was their ghost that was in the model. They were playing with the spirits of some real people in the style of those people. And this is, of course, something that we're exploring as well with neural audio synthesis, rave models, and when we train models on audio data. This is symbolic data here. I mean, it's events, but in the audio range, you really start to feel maybe who is the creator of the data set that was used to train the model. And this creates really interesting experiences for performers. And I think the next video I have is Nicola Privato here, who is busy training neural audio models, but he is also developing instruments or interfaces for them to explore them. And I'm going to play a little bit. So here he's playing particular model with these types of sounds, but he also pulls in other models like saxophones or choirs or violin models, and he's able to navigate the spaces of those sounds. What he is discovering is this sense of ownership of the data set and how he's engaging with the people whose data sets he's using. And for him, it's really like working with ghosts. You know, it's the ghost of the performer, and he's developing some theory about hauntography. That's like Derrida's hauntology with an H, not ontology, but hauntology, where he's exploring the ghosts of the past and the kind of liminal spaces between what is there and what is not there, and how history is haunting us. And for him, he's developing really interesting ideas of how to analyze and perceive the person and the qualities of the training in these neural audio models. So that's interesting. And these are one of his instruments. He does all kinds of workshops with them, notational scores for neural audio synthesis. And then I just want to show you the Haldorophone. We worked with this instrument quite a lot. It's an instrument that has traditionally been one of the uniquely designed feedback instruments, string instruments, and people are using it widely these days. There are quite a few of these instruments around. Our technician, he develops them, Halldór Úlfarsson, And we have an Haltorophone that is specially made for our lab, the yellow one on the right. And here we have a computer as part of it, and we apply all kinds of algorithms in the feedback chain between the speaker and the strings. So at the back of the instrument, there is a speaker, and it resonates the body of the instrument, so you get really interesting feedback. Here are some pictures. I can show you a video of that instrument in use. This is Julia Mogenson, who is a trained cellist, but when she started to work with this instrument, she really got interested in not playing much. She wanted to have the instrument playing, and she felt that the instrument had a certain personality that she didn't want to interrupt so much. And which we found funny, because this is a cello instrument. It has the same interface as the cello, but she just wasn't interested in playing as she is normally used to playing. And it really shifted her mode into some kind of exploration and a dialogue with the instrument. And she's working with this instrument all the time, so we are kind of following how her relationship with the instrument changes over time. Because you cannot really, I don't think you can create an instrument and get some musicians into a lab setting and have them play it in 20 minutes and then ask some questions about the instrument. It's very difficult to run typical HCI studies or psychology studies on musical instruments. The terms are so vague. For example, what is music? What is expression? What is emotion? What is expressivity? What is the goal of music? I mean, these terms, it's very difficult to ask such questions, and you have to have a more longitudinal studies. You have to have a long dialogue and a long experience with the instrument to really get anything interesting out. Yeah, we've been working with Marco Donnarumma on prosthetics, on extending the body, and he has created some interesting performances. Marco was developing music for the hard of hearing or deaf people, and people could listen to the music through quite deep drones, but also through kind of transducers that he would give people. They're stuck on his body, like ears that you can see on his body there. Very beautiful performance. But as I said, I'm going to wrap up now. I think we're moving into an age in music, at least from the perspective I'm seeing it, where we're becoming a bit more interested in post-human intentionality, that we're interested in instruments that are open and conversational and are kind of systems that we have a dialogue with. And of course, in our research project, we are kind of exploring different definitions of agency and intelligence. And I think there is no clear definition here. It's interesting for us to apply the instruments on these questions and to explore the boundaries of our definitions through this type of work. But it's basically that we're kind of instruments are extensions of our body, have always been, you know, any instruments. But we are, as you know, becoming, we're gaining instruments of our mind in increasing increasingly with the advent of generative AI and creative AI. And I think I'm just going to leave it here. I mean, I'm interested in how music is used as a tool for research. I think we can do a lot of important research in the field of music, and that's something that Plato was also kind of looking at in the ancient Greek times, where he explores how the word music comes from the word investigation, to make philosophical inquiries.